The date is February 2nd, 1943. In our timeline, the German Sixth Army surrendered at Stalingrad after months of brutal urban warfare. Over 90,000 German soldiers marched into Soviet captivity. It was the turning point of World War II. But what if it had gone differently? What if Hitler had won the Battle of Stalingrad? To understand what would have happened, we need to go back to the summer of 1942. Operation Blue was Hitler's grand strategy to capture the oil fields of the Caucasus. Germany was desperately short on fuel. Without oil, the tanks would stop rolling, the planes would stop flying, and the war machine would grind to a halt. Stalingrad wasn't even the main objective at first. It was supposed to be a secondary target, a way to protect the flank of the main thrust toward the oil fields. But Hitler became obsessed with Stalingrad. Why? The city bore Stalin's name. Taking it would be a propaganda victory like no other. So he divided his forces. Half went south toward the oil fields. Half went to Stalingrad. This was the first of many mistakes. German generals begged Hitler to focus on one objective, but he refused. He wanted both the oil and the symbolic victory. Now let's imagine a different scenario. What if Hitler had made better decisions? What if the Germans had actually taken Stalingrad and held it? There are several ways this could have happened. First, Hitler could have committed more resources earlier. Instead of dividing his forces, he could have concentrated everything on Stalingrad, taken it quickly in August or September 1942, and then pivoted to the Caucasus. Second, the Luftwaffe could have maintained air superiority longer, preventing Soviet reinforcements from crossing the Volga River. Third, the German Sixth Army could have been better supplied and reinforced during the winter months. Let's say the Germans take Stalingrad by October 1942. The entire city is in German hands. Soviet resistance crumbles. Stalin's namesake city has fallen. The psychological impact would be enormous. For the Soviets, losing Stalingrad would be devastating. Stalin had ordered that the city must not fall. He sent in hundreds of thousands of troops with the infamous Order 227, not one step back. Retreat meant execution. If Stalingrad fell despite all this sacrifice, Soviet morale would crater. But here's what's important. Taking Stalingrad doesn't mean Germany wins the war, not even close. In fact, it might have just delayed the inevitable. Let's walk through what happens next. With Stalingrad secure, Hitler orders the continuation of Operation Blue. German forces push south into the Caucasus. The goal is Baku, the oil fields in Azerbaijan. This is where things get complicated. The Caucasus Mountains are a nightmare for military operations. Narrow passes, difficult terrain, long supply lines stretching back over 1,000 miles. The Red Army would fight for every inch. Even if the Germans reach Baku, they face another problem. The Soviets would destroy the oil infrastructure before retreating. Stalin had already shown he was willing to scorch the earth. It would take months, maybe years, for the Germans to rebuild the refineries and get oil flowing. Meanwhile, they still need to defend their massive conquests. Every mile of territory requires troops to garrison it. Every supply line needs protection from partisans. The German army is already stretched to the breaking point. Let's talk about the Eastern Front as a whole. By late 1942, Germany is fighting along a front that stretches from Leningrad in the north to the Caucasus in the south. That's over 1,800 miles. Even with a victory at Stalingrad, the Germans don't have enough men to hold everything. The Soviets, on the other hand, have a nearly unlimited supply of manpower. They're conscripting millions of soldiers. Factories beyond the Ural Mountains are pumping out tanks, planes, and artillery 24 hours a day. The Soviet war machine is just getting started. Stalin would not give up after losing Stalingrad. This is crucial to understand. In our timeline, the Soviets lost millions of soldiers in 1941 and 1942. Entire armies were encircled and destroyed. They lost Kiev, Minsk, Smolensk. They nearly lost Moscow and Leningrad. Yet they kept fighting. Losing Stalingrad would be a blow, absolutely, but Stalin would regroup and counterattack somewhere else. he would find a different place to make his stand. Where would that be? Probably the Caucasus Mountains. The terrain favors the defender. Soviet troops could use the mountains to slow down the German advance, inflict heavy casualties, and buy time for reinforcements. Stalin might also launch offensives in other sectors to force Hitler to divert troops away from the south. The Red Army could attack Army Group Center near Moscow or try to break the siege of Leningrad. Hitler would have to make difficult choices about where to send his limited reserves. Now let's consider the other fronts. In North Africa, Rommel is fighting the British. By November 1942, the Battle of El Alamein turns the tide against Germany. Even with a victory at Stalingrad, Hitler can't send significant reinforcements to Africa. The British and Americans land in Morocco and Algeria in Operation Torch. Rommel is trapped between two Allied armies. North Africa falls by May 1943, just as in our timeline. In the Atlantic, the Battle of the Atlantic is reaching its climax. German U-boats are sinking Allied convoys, but new technology like radar and longer-range aircraft are turning the tide. By mid-1943, the Allies are winning the battle for control of the sea lanes. Supplies from America flow to Britain and eventually to the Soviet Union through Murmansk and Archangel. A German victory at Stalingrad doesn't change this. The strategic bombing campaign is ramping up. British bombers pound German cities at night. American bombers hit industrial targets during the day. German war production is being disrupted. Fighter production has to be increased to defend the homeland, which means fewer planes for the Eastern Front. Again, Stalingrad doesn't change this reality. Let's talk about the Americans. By 1943, the United States is fully mobilized for war. American industrial output is staggering. They're producing more planes, tanks, and ships than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. The Americans are gearing up for an invasion of Italy in 1943 and planning for the cross-channel invasion of France in 1944. Whether Germany wins or loses at Stalingrad has no impact on American plans. Here's a key point. Even if Germany holds Stalingrad and reaches the Caucasus oil fields, they can't win a war of attrition against the combined forces of the Soviet Union, the United States, and the British Empire. The numbers simply don't work. Germany has a population of about 80 million. The Soviet Union has 190 million. The United States has 130 million. The British Empire, including India, Canada, and Australia, has hundreds of millions more. Germany is outnumbered and outproduced. Let's imagine the best-case scenario for Germany. It's early 1943. They hold Stalingrad. They've captured some oil fields in the Caucasus, though production is minimal because of sabotage. Rommel has been defeated in North Africa, but the Eastern Front is stable for the moment. What does Hitler do next? He needs to make a decision. Does he go on the defensive and try to consolidate his gains? Or does he launch another major offensive? Knowing Hitler, he would attack again. In our timeline, after the disaster at Stalingrad, Hitler launched Operation Citadel in the summer of 1943, the Battle of Kursk. It was the largest tank battle in history and a complete failure. The Germans lost thousands of tanks and tens of thousands of men they couldn't replace. In this alternate timeline, Hitler might launch a similar offensive, perhaps trying to encircle Moscow or cut off Leningrad completely. But the result would likely be the same. The Soviets would be ready. They'd have deep defensive lines, minefields, anti-tank guns, and massive reserves waiting to counterattack. Let's say this offensive also fails. By late 1943, the initiative has shifted to the Soviets. They begin a series of offensives to liberate occupied territory. Even if Germany holds Stalingrad, the Red Army would attack elsewhere. They might focus on pushing the Germans out of Ukraine or breaking the siege of Leningrad. The Germans would be forced to retreat, giving up hard-won territory to avoid encirclement. Meanwhile, the Western Allies invade Italy. Mussolini is overthrown, Italy switches sides, Germany now has to defend another front in Italy with troops it desperately needs in the east. The Allies are also preparing for D-Day. Intelligence operations, deception plans, and massive build-up of forces in Britain. Nothing Germany does at Stalingrad changes the fact that the largest amphibious invasion in history is coming in 1944. By 1944, the Soviets are on the offensive all along the Eastern Front. In our timeline, they launched Operation Bagration in June 1944, which destroyed Army Group Center and liberated Belarus. In this alternate timeline, the same thing would likely happen, just perhaps in a different location. The Soviets have learned hard lessons from their defeats in 1941 and 1942. Their generals, like Zhukov and Konev, are now experienced and competent. Their tactics have improved. Deep battle doctrine, massive artillery barrages, coordination between infantry, tanks, and air support. The Red Army of 1944 is a far more formidable force than the Red Army of 1941. D-Day happens in June 1944. The Allies land in Normandy. Germany now faces a true two-front war. Hitler has to decide which front is more important. Does he send reinforcements west to throw the Allies back into the sea, or does he keep them in the east to hold back the Soviet tide? Either way, he doesn't have enough troops to do both effectively. The Wehrmacht is being ground down by attrition. Let's talk about Germany's allies. By 1944, they're all looking for a way out. Romania is nervous about the Soviet advance. Hungary is wavering. Finland wants a separate peace. Bulgaria is barely contributing. Italy has already switched sides. Germany is increasingly alone. Even if they had won at Stalingrad, this wouldn't change. These countries joined Germany because they thought Germany would win quickly. By 1944, it's clear that's not happening. The war is dragging on. Casualties are mounting, and the Allies are getting stronger. There's also the question of resources. Germany is running out of everything. Oil, despite any gains in the Caucasus, is still in short supply. Synthetic oil production is being bombed by the Allies. Rare metals needed for high-tech weapons are scarce. Manpower is critically low. By 1944, Germany is conscripting teenagers and old men. They're forming Volkssturm units, essentially civilian militias, to defend German soil. A victory at Stalingrad in 1942 doesn't solve these fundamental problems. The atomic bomb is also in development. The Manhattan Project is progressing in secret in the United States. By August 1945, the Americans will have working nuclear weapons. If Germany is still fighting at that point, there's a real possibility that Berlin gets nuked instead of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. President Truman wouldn't hesitate to use the bomb to end the war in Europe and save American lives. Let's imagine it's 1945. In this alternate timeline, Germany still holds parts of the Soviet Union, including Stalingrad, but the Allies are closing in from all sides. The Soviets are pushing through Poland toward Berlin. The Americans and British are crossing the Rhine. Germany proper is being invaded. Cities are in ruins from bombing. The population is starving. The economy has collapsed. At this point, it doesn't matter that Germany won at Stalingrad 3 years earlier. The war is lost. What about a negotiated peace? Could Germany have used a victory at Stalingrad as leverage to negotiate a settlement? Unlikely. The Allies had agreed on unconditional surrender at the Casablanca Conference in January 1943. Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin were united in their determination to completely defeat Nazi Germany. There would be no negotiated peace, no armistice, no compromise. The war would end only with Germany's total defeat. There's one more scenario to consider. What if a victory at Stalingrad had given Germany enough breathing room to develop superweapons? The V-2 rocket, jet fighters, maybe even a German atomic bomb. This is the stuff of alternate history novels, but let's be realistic. Germany's scientific programs were impressive, but they were also scattered and inefficient. Hitler kept changing priorities. Resources were diverted to pet projects, and there was intense rivalry between different agencies. Even with more time, it's doubtful Germany could have developed a war-winning weapon. The Americans had far more resources and better organization for the Manhattan Project. German scientists were brilliant, but they couldn't overcome the fundamental disadvantage of fighting a multi-front war against enemies with greater resources. So here's the bottom line. A German victory at Stalingrad would have prolonged the war. It would have caused more suffering, more deaths, more destruction. But it would not have changed the ultimate outcome. Germany would still lose World War II. The fundamental strategic realities were against Germany from the start. They were fighting enemies with larger populations, greater industrial capacity, and more resources. The Soviet Union alone could absorb horrific losses and keep fighting. Add in the United States and the British Empire, and Germany's defeat was inevitable. The Battle of Stalingrad was important, not because it decided the war, but because it marked the beginning of the end for Germany in the East. It was the point where the initiative permanently shifted to the Soviets. If Germany had won there, that shift would have just happened somewhere else, at some other battle. Maybe Kursk, maybe Kiev, maybe somewhere we've never heard of. But it would have happened. The tide of war was turning against Germany and nothing could stop it. In the end, Hitler's decision to fight for Stalingrad was a strategic blunder. He should have focused on the oil fields or gone on the defensive to consolidate his gains. But his obsession with symbolic victories over strategic sense doomed the Sixth Army. And even if he had won at Stalingrad, even if the city had fallen and the swastika had flown over the Volga River, it would have only delayed the inevitable. The combined might of the Allied powers was too great. Germany's defeat was written in the stars the moment Hitler decided to invade the Soviet Union and declare war on the United States. Stalingrad was just one chapter in that story of inevitable defeat.